All right, guys. So we are back with another edition of Criminal Justice Reform Beyond the Conversation. Today, again, we have Assemblyman Ramos with us. Thank you very much, Assemblyman Ramos, for taking
Sure.
time out of your busy schedule. I know you guys going back and forth to Albany, and I know last week was a big week for you guys.
Yes.
So, congratulations on a big victory up in Albany.
Thank you.
And as you had stated in our last conversation, that was just the beginning.
Hmm.
Not the end all be all, at least the 50A.
Hmm.
So our today's conversation, I want you to talk a little bit about the reform that you guys had, the laws that legislation you passed last week, and then
Hmm.
we have primary elections happening next week, right? June 23rd. So we are about 8 days out. I want you to let the audience who are watching now and down the road in next 8 weeks, what exactly what should be looking if somebody says, look, I haven't made up my mind that criminal justice is something that I really am passionate about, and this is what I'm going to vote on.
Hmm.
I'm going to specifically vote on people who have stood by the communities of color.
Hmm.
What are we gonna, because you know what I'm gonna do after this, what we've been doing after each conversation, we're sending the email blast to our members. We're
Hmm.
also posting on our social media what the outcome of the conversations and creating guides for these. So I think for today's, we want to have a small conversation, and you want to walk us through, and we will, then send us to our members and mass emails and social media that look, if this is what your mind and your heart is going to say that this is where I want to vote, then dig deeper than what has happened last week, because I think last week was a big momentum that everybody got on, but I think it goes a little deeper than that.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. So first of all, thanks again for the opportunity, and thank you for all the members of your organization who are on here, and the non-members. I know a lot of people follow you, um, and I always, I love every opportunity to be able to get out here and engage and inform people. So much happens in Albany and in Washington, and the public really doesn't know what's happening behind the scenes. So these webinars are really important for our constituents to put things in perspective. This week, we decided that we were going to pass a package of police reform bills. Most of you know me. You know that
Yeah.
I'm not just about words. That if if basically an elected official is worthless if all he has is words. If all he has to offer you is to tell you he's your friend, but doesn't back it up with legislation, which is what we're empowered to do.
Right.
Uh, so, I've repeated this many times. I know you've heard me say it that the Muslim community and the all communities of color should stop allowing themselves to be patronized just by elected officials who come around and call you their friend and take photos with you. You need to look, as you said, you need to look deeper and look at the legislative records. Look at where they're placing money. When we do a budget is a moral document. A budget tells the public what we feel is a priority. When we're funding things, when we're defunding schools and leaving our schools very at a marginal level, but yet we're funding things that help millionaires and billionaires. That tells you something about that moral document. So this week, at the insistence of the Black and Hispanic Caucus, up in Black, Hispanic, and Asian Caucus, we came out with a package of bills that we wanted passed. The package of bills was much bigger than what we actually passed. Unfortunately, some of the Long Island senators, uh, Democratic senators, were becoming obstacles to many of the legislations that we were trying to pass, and they wouldn't go for it. And so, having a one house bill, having bills that we just passed in the assembly, would be a waste of time. So we ended up passing a series of bills that deal with police reforms, but we need to go further. We passed 50A, which is a bill that allows um, the public to access the personnel records of police officers. So police officers have a series of complaints against them that should be a red flag. The public would have a right to know that. Up until now, police officers have been protected from the public accessing their personnel records. And these are the arguments they use. They say, well, personnel records also include unfounded cases or unsubstantiated cases. The vast majority of cases, complaints against police officers, come out unsubstantiated. Now, you have to dig deeper into this. And I was a cop, so I can tell you what the real sleight of hand is behind a lot of these things. Unsubstantiated does not mean innocent. Doesn't mean guilty either. It just means that it was the officer's word against somebody else's word, and so they didn't have enough evidence to prove the allegation. But hear me out. The opposition says it's not relevant because it's unsubstantiated, but I would submit that it's completely relevant. If you have a cop who has 30 complaints against him, and out of those 30 complaints, 20 complaints are people who came forward, people who don't know each other, and said, this police officer walked up to me and started harassing me. And when I would not cooperate, he stepped on my toes. And when I tried to push him off of my toes, he arrested me for assaulting a police officer. You have 20 unrelated people making that same allegation, and each case was unsubstantiated. That should tell us something. So it's completely relevant that we do that. So we were able to pass that, and 50A is now law, and now we have access to those personnel records. There's no reason why we should be hiding this information. It's relevant to the public. How many times an officer gets a complaint? Now, I will say that some of the conclusions that the public draws on the information that they get could be wrong because they don't understand police work. But a lot of it is clear as day. For instance, one might say, well, if a police officer gets a lot of complaints from Black people or from Hispanic people, that officer should be called into question. But I would say not necessarily. If they work in a Black area and work in a Hispanic area, then whatever complaints they get, they're going to get from that predominant race. If they work in a white area, they're going to get predominantly complaints from white people. But if they work in a white area and all the complaints they get are from Blacks and Hispanics, that might tell us something. So the raw data itself is what we provide with 58. It doesn't force anybody or tell anybody to form any conclusions, but it's certainly useful and relevant. We also outlawed the racial profile, something that would be, it's some of these things we pass, it seems ridiculous that we would even have to pass a law that says you should not racially profile somebody.
I know, that's ridiculous.
Yeah, and nobody should stop somebody because they're Black, Hispanic. Nobody should be holding a Muslim person suspect because they feel they're up to no good or because of the bias they have about Muslim people. There's no reason why police should be at the door of a mosque every week in that manner, in an invasive manner, the way I've seen in the past. All that is racial profiling, and we outlawed that. We also passed a bill. I actually have a bill that I would like that goes further, but we passed a bill that makes it illegal for somebody to call in a false report if it's based on bias. Now, right now, it's already illegal for somebody to make a false police report. But as we see, a lot of people are calling the police on Black and Hispanic people for things that they know, for having a barbecue outside, we saw that lady in Central Park.
Absolutely.
Who, the guy was just bird watching and said, look, you're supposed to have your dog on a leash and it's scaring all the birds here. And she started calling the police, making up a story that the Black man was threatening her. We saw it on video. And so this makes that illegal if it's based on bias. She's clearly trying to get the police, use the police as her personal race soldiers, and by calling them, knowing that it's not going to turn out too well for the black person she's calling on. But my legislation goes a step further, because the problem is that it's already illegal to file a false police report. The problem is the police are not arresting the racists who are making the calls. That lady was not arrested. So we're going to make another law now that says if you do it based on bias, it's illegal. Okay, but if the cops don't arrest her on it, so my bill has a pro-arrest policy. it says that if a racist calls in a false report on a person of color, the police have no discretion to let that person off. They must arrest that person. Similar to the laws we have with domestic violence. If there's a domestic violence situation, the
Yep.
police must arrest. If they have the probable cause, they must arrest the person. Even if the complainant says, I want to drop charges, the police cannot drop charges. They must arrest the person if they have probable cause.
And correct me if I'm wrong, Assemblyman, isn't it that even without the probable cause, because I know it happened to
On
somebody.
domestic violence?
Yeah.
No, they have to have probable cause. They can't supersede the penal law. You know, in order to take somebody's freedom in this country, you must have probable cause. So if you have probable cause, you must arrest. If the woman says, I don't want him arrested, you still have to arrest him.
Yeah, that I know. That I know.
So here in the Central Park case, we have her on video doing this.
Absolutely.
There's no reason why the cops should say, okay, let's call it even. Everybody goes home. No, this is a racist crime. They're calling the police on somebody. You know, if somebody calls the police on against a Muslim and says, well, you know, they're up to no good in their house, they're conspiring to do something, and whatever their bias is, they start doing that. That person should be arrested if it's not true. Why should you put somebody under suspicion, from the police and under scrutiny, if based on your bias? So we passed that law. We also have laws that create civil penalties, where people have a right to sue the police officer personally. Right now, the departments indemnify them. So there's, of course, you can do whatever you want, beat up whoever you want. You don't have to pay it out of your pocket. So all these laws will hopefully, change human behavior.
Right.
I have other bills that I think really go more towards the scene of the crime. These bills mostly are after the fact. We have a bill that creates a special prosecutor. That's fine, but that's after a cop already killed somebody.
Yep.
That's about prosecuting him. The personnel record, after a cop gets in trouble, you can find out that he was a problem all along. All these things are kind of after the fact.
Yeah.
I have a bill that makes police officers into mandated reporters of police abuse. So that means if a police officer sees another police officer abusing somebody and he does not report it, he will go to jail for not reporting it.
And we have these laws for like healthcare.
We do. Social workers are mandated reporters, teachers are mandated reporters for child abuse. There's a precedent for that. Police officers should be mandated reporters, because we keep hearing from the police, it's not, all most police are good, and it's a few bad apples. And yes, I agree, most police are good. But I don't consider a person who stands there and allows his partner to kill somebody as a good police officer.
Yep.
I don't consider somebody who puts his hands in his pocket while somebody's getting choked out. That's not a good police officer.
Nope.
So, to my brother and sister police officers, I tell them, yes, there are a few bad apples, but the minute you decide to defend them, the minute you decide to cover them up, the minute you decide not to do anything when your partners are doing a crime, you're no longer a good police officer. You have become complicit at that point. So this law of mandated reporting creates a situation where I believe will save lives, because a police officer, if there's 5 police officers at the scene, one is choking somebody out, he might say, hey, I'm not going to go down because of you. Get your hands off the guy. Let's just put the cuffs on him and bring him in. So that might change human behavior. We need to do more to go to the scene of the crime, to the core of what's happening.
A lot of deterrence, right? So I think, these will become the deterrence for people who may be thinking, especially officers. And again, I think, I really do want to note, because often what happens is that, the conversation comes back to same old thing, that not all cops are bad. And, I think that is something that I have to keep reminding people that that's not what the conversation is about, not even now and not before. I don't think our conversation was ever about good cops. I think good cops are always going to be there. It's about these issues that we keep happening, and it's happening at least since the invention of the smartphones and whatnot, that we're seeing a lot more of it. But
we've been saying things for the good part of a century. The communities of color have been saying this is happening. At what point do people start to believe us? Now, I'm glad to see we've seen a lot of white people at these demonstrations.
Right.
This same demonstration in the 60s would have been very different. So,
Absolutely.
there are signs that the world is changing. I hope that we're at a watershed moment, but it's up to each and every one of you to expect more from your elected officials, right? We did what we had to do immediately in the state, but you have county elected officials. They're in charge of the Suffolk County Police Department. They have direct control over the Suffolk County Police Department. They should be passing a series of bills that deal with the protocols of how they investigate police shootings. Because we constantly see police officer kill somebody, right? And we'll see it on video. We see Rodney King get beat up, beaten to a pulp. We'll see all these cases. Somebody else choked out in Staten Island, and then these guys get off, and you wonder what jury got them off. How is it? And the reason is that they taint the investigation at the scene of the crime.
Yep.
Many will conduct what's called a negative investigation. That's not an investigation to prove somebody guilty. It's an investigation to prove somebody innocent.
Yep.
That's what they do. So we have a bill that we passed last week that creates a special prosecutor, but that prosecutor doesn't come into the scene until afterwards. And he takes what the police department hands him, garbage
Yep.
in, garbage out. If the police department hands him a tainted investigation, then basically that he's not going to be able to prosecute that case. And that's how people get off. So we have to have a uniform protocol that goes across the state. There are hundreds of police departments in New York State. Each one of them gets to determine how they investigate crimes of a police officer and shootings. It shouldn't be that way. It should be blanket protocol. These are the bases you have to cover. And we need video surveillance of those investigations. So we don't put police officers going up to a person and the witness says, yeah, I saw him. The cop went and choked this guy out and the guy was screaming for help and he killed him. Right? And the cop will take his name maybe and say, okay, you can go on your way. And he'll do this 3 or 4 times. You find one guy who says, I didn't see too much. I was down the block and I heard the gunshots. And they say, okay, come on, let me get a statement from you. Garbage in.
Exactly.
They will taint the investigation. So if you have video surveillance at these scenes, that would go far to show who the police spoke to and who was around. Also, the protocols of cameras. Every police officer should have a camera, and no police officer should object to that because a camera protects a police officer. The police officer 20 years. I'm going to tell you that, yeah, I've had false allegations against me. A camera is what protects you. If you're a good officer, a camera will show you did nothing wrong.
Yep.
And if you've done nothing wrong, you should not fear a camera. But we should go further than just supplying cameras. We need to have protocols because in Suffolk County, Nassau County, and many departments, nothing tells them when they need to turn that camera on. They need to turn that camera on the minute they decide to make contact with somebody before they leave their police car. That camera should be on. We've seen shooting after shooting and brutalizing of people, and you always hear the same excuse. You don't know what happened before the video started. Right? It's always somehow the tone of everything was different right before the video started. And so those protocols need to be there. Police officers need to turn those things on. And I've been jumping up and down the assembly. I'm the only one who has 20 years experience as a police officer. I know all the sleight of hand. I know the way things are covered up and the way, these investigations are booby traps. So I'm hoping that we can do more, but your local legislators can do so much more with your local departments. They have direct control. They're the ones who hire the commissioner. They're the ones who have that leverage to do what they have to do. Because I'm telling you, in a lot of police departments, it's a runaway train.
So, Assemblyman, let's talk about that, right? I mean, let's talk about, we have the elections that are coming up next week, the primaries, right? And then the general election in November. And then, your local elections are happening next year on the county and city level. I think it's very important. A lot of people who are mad that, what is the system? What is the system? Let's just talk about next week. We have a primary race that's happening. If somebody that has been really focused on criminal justice reform, as we all have, right? But now it has become front and center. What is one thing or two things or a list of things that we must remember before we walk into the polling booth?
Well, you should look up the voting records. That's all online. The whole everybody can see on there, pick out bills that go towards things in your community. The Muslim community is racially profiled, and these are laws that we have passed. Look at the voting records of how they voted, not just now, but on a series of bills in the past couple of years. Who's been an obstacle to civil rights reform that go directly to issues that the Muslim community deals with? Think about those elected officials who come to you guys on Eid holiday and break bread with you and tell you what great people you are. And think about who was silent when Peter King comes out and says that we have too many mosques in this country. And so all these people who supposedly were your friends, what did they say? What did they do in those moments? These are things that I think the Muslim community needs to look at. And don't think that elected officials respect you because they say you're your friend and you're nice to them. No, they don't. They don't. They respect more when you hold them accountable, because they respect you more because they will have to respond to you. As long as they feel that your egos can be stroked and you can be patronized, that's not respect. And that's not friendship either.
Absolutely.
You have to go by the facts and by their records and by their absence or presence. And those are the things that you have to factor in when you're
That's
gonna make a
that.
vote.
So that's a challenge, right, Assemblyman Ramos? That's a big challenge. Like I don't know what it is, and probably today we won't be able to figure out the root cause of the problem, right? But our challenge is that you're absolutely right, right? That we have these people come and patronize us, but I don't know if as a community we are timid to ask these tough questions.
Mhm.
Are like I almost like we are afraid that these people will get mad at us, or
Mhm.
like they won't be our friends. I really don't know what is it that we can change, or is it a natural progression that will change naturally? But
Well,
that's one thing.
that's an internal problem that needs to be dealt with in the Muslim community and Hispanic and African American community. The fact that we allow ourselves to be divided and we don't hold our own accountable. You had Muslims out there campaigning for Peter King,
For Trump as well.
yeah, and Trump. So within, not only Muslim and Hispanics too, we need to hold our own accountable. We need to hold our own accountable that sell us out. We've had Hispanic elected officials vote against the Hispanic agenda. You know, our community needs to call them out. Do you think that the white community stays silent? No,
No.
they're not silent when they don't like an elected. They're not worried about an elected official not being their friend. That is part of our democracy. Muslims are Americans like anybody else and have a right to hold their head up high and demand that our government respond to their needs. And they have the right that if government officials are not, they have the right to go in there and exercise their vote and speak out. They have a right to speak out in opposition of elected officials who do not attend to the agenda of a segment of American citizens that are their constituents.
So if I have to put down two things or three things, let's say I'm a voter or I'm sending out a mass mailer uh, next weekend, right, for people, or maybe by before the end of this week, to let people know that these are the four things in New York State. These are the few bills that look at those records, and that will tell you that uh, forget about last week what happened, but what has the record been prior to that. Give me
Mm.
some of those bills that people can take a look at it and make up their mind to see where people really do stand for the communities of color.
Well, as I said, racial profiling bills in the past, we've passed some of them. The DREAM Act, something that allows students to be able to get an education. Students who did nothing illegal, no matter what somebody thinks about somebody who crossed the border without documents, the child did not take part in that decision. So how as American citizens can we punish children for something that their parents did? How a person votes tells you a lot about their heart on that bill there. And they dehumanize these kids as if somehow they're criminals and justify marginalizing them for something that their parents did. The driver's license, something that was actually good for American citizens. If immigrants have licenses, that means they have to take a test. They have to learn how to drive properly. They will have insurance to cover you if they have an accident with you. But no, racism really surpasses self-interest sometimes. You see people vote against their own self-interest when it comes to issues of race, you know. Um, so the funding, you need to look at the funding of issues. You have communities that have mosques, that have Muslim organizations. How many come, help organize your community, help speak about your issues? How many put funds towards your Muslim schools? How many, you have to analyze all of that. How many have done all these things? And factor all that into your vote, because that, if not, you're doing your own people a disservice by not factoring in or just automatically uh, giving somebody a vote because they came to your mosque and took a picture with you. These things must be thought out before. Most of you have struggled very hard for that opportunity to have the right to vote here, to come here as American citizens. Each one of you can probably write a book as to the trials and tribulations and obstacles your family had gone through just to come to the land of the free and have the opportunity to exercise your vote and have a better quality of life. Value that. Don't devalue your vote. Value it by putting some thought into how you cast that vote.
Very good. All right, Assemblyman Ramos, thank you very much. These are very good points. What we will do actually is that every time we have a call with you and other leaders, what we do is we send out a mass email talking about the talking points and action item that creates that. So on our last email, we had sent an action item to call the Long Island Six to ensure that they vote on 50A and the repeal of 50A. And then after this conversation today, I'm very happy that you gave us some pointers to really go back and look at all these specific items, right?
Mhm.
Funding, green light bill,
Have
police
you
harassment.
invited have you invited the Long Island Six to come on here and answer your questions? If not, it's something you can think about. Have you invited the legislators in districts where there are mosques and have
No,
constituents?
not so it's I think very good, very good point. I think we will because anybody that knows you definitely know you that you have been. I always say that you've been standing with the Muslim American community before it was cool to stand with the Muslim American community. So I think, and that's the kind of leadership and engagement that we want to see in all these districts. And I have to tell you, not because my relationship with you or or you've been a very good friend to APPAC, not because of that, but I really think anybody that is watching in the Pakistani American community will vouch that we have not seen an outreach from many of the legislators, unfortunately, across 150 assembly districts like we have seen with you. And there are many legislators who have mosques in their districts and large Muslim community. But for some odd reason, we have yet to see from the assembly level this kind of engagement. And so we are fortunate to have this relationship with your office in your district. But I think for anybody that's listening, within the Muslim American community, that always goes to show that, there is now a bar that has been set, that what should you expect out of people?
Mhm.
And the amount of the funding and legislation and getting Muslim community involved, I think has come out of your district. I really don't think it has come out of, unfortunately, any other district. And I think that could be a guiding principle for a lot of people to really say, hey, look, how come in one district we have been able to do this, we do this,
Right.
right?
Why do we
Uh,
have Eid holiday here and not somewhere else?
right,
Why do the students, the Muslim students, they have a prayer room here, but not other areas? You know, it's all
right.
because
Not
elected
only that,
officials
on the
need to be
funding
held
side,
accountable.
some funding side, about $300,000 invested in local, Muslim community
Yes.
over the years. So I think, people really get surprised that how is that possible that hundreds and thousands have been invested in local Muslim community in one district, whereas that we don't see that in a much denser populated area where Muslims are, right? In New York City, there are many
Mhm.
districts, and we don't see that. So I really encourage everybody to really take into all these things into the account and then move forward on June 23rd. Because I think uh, we have to, as a community, whether you talk about criminal justice reform, whether you talk about racism against the Jews and the Muslims, whether you talk about discrimination against Hispanics and the blacks, whatever your issues are, I think we really have to get out of this. Listen, who came and said hello to us and came to our events and took a picture with us, to really go back and look at the bills and the funding, because I think that was very early on, in my relationship with you. I think that you had said that, look, Arthur, you got to go beyond these photo ops. You got to
Mhm.
go to two things: who is funding you, who's bringing resources to you, and who is really putting bills and legislations out there to make your life easier. And if
I
you
want to
are,
thank you. APPAC is, one of the organizations that's asking the right questions, creating a bigger conversation, uh, and speaking about what needs to be spoken about. If I think back at the debates that APPAC has played a factor in. I remember one debate where I was there, and my opponent had put out a racist flyer against Muslims, trying to defame me somehow. He put out a flyer with camels on it,
I remember
asking
that.
why, because I had gone to Turkey. I was helping the Syrian refugees
Yeah,
on
I
the border
remember
of
that.
Turkey. You remember that?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
and
That was
it
something.
was, I was so proud that the Muslim community stood up and said to my opponent, "Why would you put such an? They don't even have camels in Turkey." It
I
was just, he
remember
was just
that.
trying to put out these negative images about Muslims and saying, why is Ramos over there, in Turkey helping the Syrian refugees when he has a district to represent? I represent human beings and I go where my conscience takes me. And that certainly shouldn't be something to criticize. But the Muslim community stood up for the first time, and they I'm telling you, they held no words back, and they said this is wrong, and you're accountable
Emotions were
for it.
emotions were raw that night a
Yes,
little bit.
yes. But I was so proud of the Muslim community because they spoke out. They weren't timid. They
Yeah.
had every right to speak out at something that was offensive to them,
Well,
and they did it. And we need more of that.
I think that goes to show, Assemblyman Ramos. I will tell you that goes to show when the community think that somebody has got their back. I think in your district that is very prevalent, right? I don't think that's an like a hidden secret that you back Muslim community and you got their back through thick and thin. And I think when a community have that kind of confidence, I think they're encouraged and they're not timid anymore to really do come out and ask tough questions. And anybody that's either watching now or going to watch later, I really think that we must demand this kind of people having our back. I mean, because at the end of the day, being a constituent in any district is no different than I mean, it doesn't make a difference skin color, where you come from, what language you speak, what religion you practice. But I think your legislator in that district, if they show that they got your back, I really think that really encourages people to come out and ask the questions and really
Mhm.
be involved, as they have done in your district, right?
Right.
So
But don't wait for that because many will not have your back. So you need to ask these tough questions. You need to say, what's the story here? And I know Muslims want to be very kind and cordial. And I know when they come to your mosque, you don't want to be, cause conflict. But, when a guy like Peter King comes to your mosque, it's not being offensive or combative to answer, Mr. King, you said there's too many mosques in this country, that we have to limit the number of mosques. What did you mean by that? And how
yeah,
many is enough?
yeah.
And are there enough Catholic churches? And these questions need to be asked. It's not being offensive. It's accountability. So um, I understand, because uh, even in the Hispanic community, most people have gone through so much to come to this country, and they're so appreciative at the better quality of life that they're having that we don't want to rock the boat. And we could, because in our home countries, when you rock the boat, the consequences are much more serious. Um, so we have to realize that we're in the land of the free here. We have every right to hold our
Absolutely.
heads up high, question authorities, and speak truth to power.
Well, thank you very much, Ashley Ramos. I think there were some good words of wisdom for everybody. And we always appreciate you taking your time out. I know it's a busy schedule for you, and the beginning of the week is always very tough. But like I always say that your words, Muslim community, I think on Long Island has gotten better because of your encouragement and your words. So thank
Thank
you
you.
very much
Thank you
for
so
always
much.
supporting the community, always guiding the community, always creating these lines of interns through your office. That you always are very gracious about. And you know what? We will have you back again
Thank you.
uh, post election primary, and we'll talk about some of the primary elections and some of the results that came out.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you very much, Assemblyman Ramos.